And just a quick comment, I can't remember if I said it before, but the digital health playbook that was sent out yesterday to all of you is now posted on the RISE website. So anytime the ministry makes available any documents, we'll go there. Can we just take one question online? Is that okay? Great. We'll just bounce back and forth between online and face-to-face.
So the one online question is, what is a reasonable size for a year one population?
Yeah, it's a great question. I've never seen the ministry articulate a view about that. I think how I would approach answering the question would be, you need to be able to show in year one that you can move the needle on some key metrics. So it's going to have to be a big enough group that you can plausibly move the needle for that group. So I don't have a sense of what that would be. But it's going to be highly dependent on a variety of factors, but at the end of the day, that's your goal in year one, is to show that you can move the needle on some of the key quadruple aim metrics. So you're going to have to then work backwards to say, what are the population segments we're going to prioritize, and are there enough there? And given what we anticipate to be the effects of what we're going to do, can we plausibly show a movement on that metric? Question from here. So do we have a microphone that we can pass over? We're just sorting out the microphone.
Hello?
Yep, there we go.
Hi, I'm Melanie Padvey. I'm part of the planning team for the Ottawa East OHT that's working towards full application. I was wondering, from the ministry perspective, with the development of the program to support, if there was any openness to actually participating in our planning forums in real time, because I think with the timelines that we're working with, it would be much more efficient to get a specific answer to a specific question that the planning team is not in a position to answer, because, so, and also it helps, the whole team hear the same response from the ministry. So in the program development, it's a question in terms of openness or, feedback from that perspective to open. And perhaps even for RISE, if you, in terms of participating and giving us then some specific resources based on the questions that have come up or the topic of conversation, that would also be really helpful.
Yep, absolutely. So, in the last one, we're actively trying to do that. So every time someone identifies a need, we're then saying, should we get a webinar up? And that's why we've left ourselves flexible on the topics for these. Should we get a RISE brief up so we have conversations coming up about what we think are priorities? I've given the example already about working with Francophone populations, that it's very familiar to you, but it's not going to be familiar to many teams, and we need to support them in doing that. Then if I move to your first question, everything that I've heard from the ministry is they are very open to feedback about what would help most. But I think the reality is that between now and October 9th, there isn't enough bandwidth to provide individualized support to every team. But every team has been linked to a ministry point of contact, and that person's job is, in part, to quickly identify the right response to your question. If it's about individualized coaching, unfortunately, between now and October 9th, the answer is probably no. But if it's, gee, we need someone to kind of walk us through this piece, then my experience is they're prepared to do that. If it's, can RISE, include in one of its upcoming webinars this, and they are acting as that single point of contact because they are aware of partners beyond RISE, within the ministry and outside the ministry, that often can mount a very, very quick response that will get you what you need. In the longer run, the issue of individualized coaching is very much on the table. One of the things that we've been talking about in the coming couple of months is reviewing the literature on what have we learned in the field of individualized coaching and how can we operationalize that with teams. It probably wouldn't be RISE that delivered that coaching. We have a lot of associations and others in the province that have a lot of experience, but we can see the need, and that's come forward before. Another example of a need that's come forward has been independent facilitators. So in some communities, these are very difficult conversations because of past history about how different organizations have treated different people, how individuals have behaved, and sometimes that independent facilitator can be helpful in moving a community along. So I'd encourage you to share your thoughts about after October 9th, what kind of individualized support would be most helpful to you, and we're going to be actively contacting people to also hear from them directly about that. And then the hope would be that then the ministry would be in a position to say, okay, given what we currently have and this articulated need, who is best positioned or what groups are best positioned to deliver on that? So I wish the answer was individualized now, but as you can imagine, you know, this is a huge transformation, and the ministry is working as fast as it can on key priority areas, and the individualized supports are available in the sense of that one point of contact, but not through the level of individualized coaching. Yeah. So the question was about ministry direction where you need it at a moment. So I guess, you know, the tension here is, and this comes up at a lot of sessions, the paradox sometimes is people feel like the ministry has in the past kind of micromanaged every major transformation effort. And here, instead, what they've done, and I think it's fantastic, is they've set out the broad parameters, and then they've said to each community, you come up with a solution that is right for your communities. And I think that makes a lot of sense. And then to recognize, though, that we need to rapidly learn and improve. So we might get 2 weeks in and suddenly realize, wow, we're all struggling with active offer. How do we operationalize that with Francophone populations? Well, we have folks like yourselves who could come to the table very quickly and say, here's 8 things you can do to operationalize active offer based on our rich experience. So I think they're trying to move as quickly as possible. But when you have policy questions that you feel need to be answered, send them in. Sometimes the answer might be, oh, we actually already have an answer about that. Other times it might be, we're going to put it in the hopper, and our hope is in the coming weeks and months, we will get there, but you should move based on what you now know. Great. Yep. Absolutely. And absolutely. Yep. Great. So another question online?
Yeah. So the question is, do you have a sense as to whether organizations are openly sharing their readiness assessments with the public and non-signatories? Have you observed a common practice? Just as an aside to that, another individual online said that in Chatham-Kent, we've shared our self-assessment with everyone who's asked.
Wow, I think that's great. So we have not heard about people sharing their readiness assessments, but my view is the more people who do, the better, and that will also be true of the full application. The great thing about this model is folks are not competing. Like, if one team does really well, that is no skin off anyone else's back, and I think all teams will get farther faster when they openly share. One really concrete example of that is, even if teams aren't willing to share their full application, we think it would be hugely helpful if every team shared their year 1 priority populations once they're finalized. Because if 15 teams have focused on adults with mental health and substance use problems, we should get them connected, because as Heather mentioned in the webinar on Monday, there are things happening at the regional and provincial level that it would be a shame for you to duplicate. You can just connect to those resources that are available. But also, if Chatham-Kent has done amazing work in thinking how do outreach services work for people with mental health and substance use problems, why not share them? So I would encourage folks to share them, but the short answer to the question is I have not seen people publicly share them, but we would strongly encourage them. And as soon as the application deadline hits, we are going to approach teams and say, would you at least be willing to share these details that would then allow us to start to make connections among teams who can learn from one another? And the biggest, most important thing is, what are your year 1 priority populations?
And just as a plug for everyone who's on the community practice, I put up a post under the 4th building block yesterday to talk about if people do want to share their priority populations. There's an opportunity to do that there.
Great, super. Because this work is happening right now on priority populations, so if people can connect now, that would be great.
So just so you know, in Ottawa, we've all shared our self-assessment with at least the 3, and even others that actually did application as they asked for. So, but the 3 that are going forward for a full application have all seen the other application.
Amazing. I think that's exactly the culture that would be optimal, is folks being willing to share, because again, none of us have all the answers, but you have such rich experiences and expertise in a variety of areas others can learn from, and hopefully vice versa with you learning from other teams?
I think there's a real opportunity here in Ottawa as well to share, because not just your applications, but you're the only place that has an innovative model that's going to full application, and that makes you look different from other areas of the province. I think that's probably makes it more complicated, I'm guessing, but it also is an opportunity for the rest of the province to learn. So, you know, I think we'll be watching and listening and hearing from you about how you're navigating, thinking through how you're going to manage child health as an OHT, as well as, you know, your specific OHTs that are more geographically focused.
And I guess just one quick comment on that point. You know, again, there's lots of things that haven't been worked out. You know, what's most important for teams now to be focused on is what can they do locally? And you just have to be aware of the fact that there are many unanswered questions that are happening at that provincial level, including what happens to these regional and provincial assets. So as Heather indicated, you know, there are the innovative models, but there's lots of exciting stuff that will come out of Ontario Health in the year ahead and so on. And so you just need to work knowing that there are a lot of uncertainties, but likely a lot of really helpful things that will come down the pike. And for now, you focus on what you can control, which is what you can do locally to move the needle for your year one priority populations and start to get those building blocks in place. Other questions or comments?
There's a excuse me, question coming from the group in terms of partnering with private partners. So we have some interested groups that we're really interested in partnering with because of holistic approach and proactive in terms of population health. So we were wondering if there was any guidance or anything in terms of partnering with them, especially related to governance and funding and that.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. I mean, I've not heard, you know, as you know, we have a system that is on the delivery side is all private for-profit and private not-for-profit. So we're used to working with private providers. There are, of course, exceptions, like municipal governments sometimes have, you know, public long-term care homes. But by and large, our system is one of private providers. So unless I'm missing something, I would have said that it's certainly appropriate for them to be part of the table if they're involved in direct service provision. I think one of the things that is coming up on the home care provider front that we hear in a lot of conversations is many home care providers provide services that touch on multiple teams because they often have a regional orientation, and they're finding it difficult to field executives to every single meeting that's happening across every team that happens to be within their service area. Our advice to them, just very pragmatically, is we know you can't keep, you know, providing services, and very much the ministry obviously wants everything to keep operating while off to the side you're working on this new transformation. So that needs to keep going. And if I were a home care provider, I would just want to be at those few meetings where you're talking about where home care can help. And in the short run, that's just the working groups or whatever you call them focused on year one priority populations, where you want to say, okay, if we're dealing with older adults with multiple conditions, one of which is mental health and substance use, some of them are going to need home care. Can you help us imagine what those services would look like? There is an appendix on home care. Do you have any advice to the ministry about the future of home care? But my practical advice on that front is this is so much to do by October 9th. I would just focus on how would home care work optimally for you to move the needle for your year one priority populations, and I would put that in Appendix A. And only if I had free time, which is hard to imagine I would I sit back and ask the big question about home care. But you might have people that are involved in your team that really want to inform that policy development process about where home care is going to go in the future, in which case they can spend time on Appendix A. Harry?
So 2 questions from online. The first is, do you know how many teams are going ahead with the MOU and due diligence before the application?
That are going ahead with an MOU and I'd say we don't, no. I mean, the requirements, you know, when I read the application, I don't see that being an explicit requirement. So I think, you know, what the ministry is, what I read the application as saying is, you need to signal that you have processes in place that will allow you to implement in your areas in year one. But that doesn't mean that all of these details need to be worked out. You know, it's years away before we get to a single funding envelope and a whole bunch of people signing on a dotted line. This is about being ready for the next step. So by October 9th, you have to be able to describe what will year one look like. And there are going to be many, many things that won't have been sorted out at that point, and that includes a massive chunk of the collaborative governance. That's why on the collaborative governance slide I said, if what you can focus on in year one is building or rebuilding the trusted relationships, then you're going to be golden, because when you eventually get to the tough stuff around contracts years from now, you're going to be in a good place because everybody's going to trust one another to do the right thing.
Bernard Leduc from Hôpital Montfort. We're in a process with partners of building Ontario, a health hub, the Orleans Health Hub, which actually takes into consideration being patient-centered with providers from the community services and hospitals. We've got 7 partners. And we've been working on it, on this project for the past 10 years.
Wow, great.
But it's, construction has started right now.
Yep.
But we have the same philosophy in terms of collaborative governance.
Super.
We're still trying to have a process with MOU. Just to let you know, it takes incredible amount of time and resources before you all agree on MOU. So,
sure.
There's no MOU possible before October 9th.
Right. No, that's excellent guidance. Super. Excellent. Good to hear that from you directly with that experience. Another question from online for Carrie?
So 2 questions from online. The first one is another question around kind of how many. And I think that, so the question is how many folks are partnering with vendors at this point? But,
with vendors?
So they give the exemption of IT vendors or oxygen vendors.
Right.
I don't know that that's kind of a number that we would have the answer to, though, but I would suggest if they're willing to post that as a question on the community practice, because I think that's something that other people can benefit from, and to hear a little bit about the experience of people who are going ahead with that or are not, and what their reasoning is behind it. The second question.
But maybe if I can just say, I guess it feels like, so, the messages that I've heard have been, existing funding envelopes are just going to keep funding. People need to keep doing what they've already been doing. So like with the oxygen vendors, that kind of stuff, I would have just thought that's just handled through regular processes. And what you don't want to do is prematurely commit yourself to a new long-term contract, because the transformation is going to take a few years to play out, and you don't want to circumscribe yourself. I would have assumed that you would want to handle that through existing processes. The IT stuff, the digital health playbook just came out, and so I would be very hesitant to make commitments until I had fully absorbed that, because that is a hugely helpful resource where the ministry is articulating how we're going to go from where we are now with our relatively weak digital health ecosystem, or at least compared to other countries, and get us to where we need to be. We have a lot of if I can use building blocks in another way, we have a lot of building blocks for digital health, but they're not connected, and we're missing some, and we really have a chance to leapfrog way ahead of where we currently are. So on that front, I would just say, again, hold off on commitments until you've fully absorbed the playbook, fully absorbed the new policy documents that articulate how that needs to be approached, and also fully absorb the catalog with all the huge assets we already have. So the signaling in the playbook is very much, we want local teams to be thinking about how to put in place a really vibrant digital health ecosystem locally, but it also needs to connect to the rest of the province. So the worst thing that would happen is we end up with 40, 80 little digital ecosystems that aren't connected. So there's always going to be this tension between trying to move ahead the local digital architecture while being absolutely certain that it connects to the province-wide architecture, and the Digital Health Playbook helps to think that through. And in terms of the individualized support, when you read those materials, you'll see the ministry is making available those supports. Like, you can contact folks in the Digital Health Secretariat to work through particular issues. So you can go in through your main ministry point of contact, but there's also, digital health points of contact that can help you noodle through those issues.
So the next question is one about clarification. When you refer to year one, are you referring to fiscal year 2019-2020 or fiscal year 2020-2021?
So the interesting thing with year one is year one goes from whenever you're approved to go to the next stage. So don't think in terms of fiscal years. So the way things are going to run for the foreseeable future is you keep operating your core businesses on a fiscal year basis with your existing funding arrangements. Meanwhile, if you're approved to move to implementation for year one, then the year starts whenever you get the go-ahead to start. So if you're notified on, December 15th, that is when year one begins, and it will go from there. So there's a disconnect from the fiscal years. The existing system keeps using fiscal years. The new team model starts from whenever you get the approval to move into year one. Any other questions or comments, either folks in the room or folks online? So will slides be shared? Mark is asking. Yes, absolutely. So they should be already online on the RISE website. So if you go back to this event under Join Events, you should see a hyperlink to the slides. And within a couple of days, you'll also find the recording from the session. So last call for questions, either folks in person or online. And then otherwise what we'll do is we'll bring the WebEx part of the session and the audio recording to closure. And then we'll just have a quick conversation with the folks that are physically in the room to see if there are any other issues. So people often feel a bit awkward about speaking when they know they're being recorded and listened in on. So for those who are physically here, we'll continue the conversation briefly offline. But last call, especially for the folks that are online. Any other questions? All right, so thank you very, very much for those of you who've joined us remotely by WebEx. We appreciate you connecting in. We'll bring the WebEx session to a close. So again, the slides are available. The recordings will be available soon. And the next event that we have coming up is the lunchtime webinar led by Rob Reed on Tuesday from 12 to 1. So we'd encourage you to sign up for that under Join Events on the RISE website. So thanks very much for joining us, and I'm sure we'll be in touch